I'm Chris Goldsmith, CEO of Task Force Butler. At both Against All Enemies and Task Force Butler, we're focused on making sure you're informed about the persistent threat of neo-Nazis, fascist street gangs, and extremist militia. As we're going to show you today, the radicalization pipeline is taking angry young white men and juicing them up on grievances, hyping them on militant versions of masculinity and gun culture, and turning them back into our society. There's a generation of Timothy McVeighs and Dylan Roofs being groomed for violence, and they're just one bad day away from being our next mass shooters. Today, we're going to make sure you know about Patriot Front leader Thomas Rousseau and the Nazis who follow him, break the law under his orders, and go to jail to impress him. You might have seen last week that 5 members of Patriot Front were convicted for conspiracy to riot in Idaho. Rousseau and 30 other members of his neo-Nazi gang were arrested last summer as they were preparing to attack a pride event in Coeur d'Alene. They were convicted thanks to Rousseau writing down that plan to attack people and carrying that plan with him for the police to find when they were arrested. Rousseau is 25 and grew up middle class in Texas. Thomas Rousseau is also a committed white supremacist who hangs out with pedophiles and murderers. To be clear, those are not the opinions of myself or of Task Force Butler. Those are proven facts with documentary evidence and multiple convictions to back up the statements. I'll address those facts very soon, but first, Thomas Rousseau. Rousseau began showing signs of white nationalist beliefs as a young teenager. By high school, the FBI had picked up on his racist organizing across Texas, and his infamy grew as he emerged as a leader of the white nationalist gang Vanguard America. In 2017, Rousseau's role as a leader in Vanguard America also meant he was a leading organizer behind the deadly Charlottesville Unite the Right neo-Nazi rally. Just a moment to define the terms we're using here, because extremists have done a pretty good job of blurring the lines. When we say white nationalist, we're not talking about people who are patriotic and happen to be white. Senator Tuberville, this note is for you. To be a white nationalist means to be an advocate for genocide, the forced removal or mass murder of people of color. This is the definition of genocide, and genocide is the only way to achieve an ethno-state. A white nationalist is a genocidal maniac, okay, Tuberville? And when we say Nazi, we're not using hyperbole. We're talking about National Socialism, the far-right totalitarian political ideology and practices associated with Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party in Nazi Germany. Again, we're talking about people who want to see our government commit genocide against our own people, Jews, people of color, the LGBTQ community, and others. This is what we're talking about when we say Patriot Front is a white nationalist gang of neo-Nazis. Now that we have that cleared up, remember when I said Thomas Rousseau pals around with child sex predators and murderers? Here's Rousseau in his Vanguard America uniform, leading Vanguard America as their so-called ground commander during the Unite the Right rally with James Fields. James Fields is the man who murdered Heather Heyer and injured over a dozen when he rammed a car into a crowd during the Unite the Right protests. In the weeks following the attack, Rousseau claimed that Fields wasn't a Vanguard America member, which is a pretty classic "are you going to believe me or your lying eyes" defense. There's ample documentary evidence of Fields in the Vanguard America uniform, getting invited to the neo-Nazi rally to march with Vanguard America, being in Vanguard America private chats, standing with other Vanguard America members, and carrying a shield with the Vanguard America emblem right before he murdered someone. Unite the Right had the exact opposite effect for the assortment of deplorables that gathered in Charlottesville than the name of the neo-Nazi rally sought to achieve. Vanguard America, like other far-right groups that showed up there, splintered, an effect that was accelerated by Rousseau's paranoid, immature leadership style. Rousseau has actually been pretty successful in projecting the narrative that Vanguard America dissolved into chaos and ceased to exist. End of story. But the true story is that Rousseau just seized control of the organization, its online servers, its members, and then rebranded it into a totally new organization, Patriot Front. Vanguard America is Patriot Front. Patriot Front is Vanguard America. Patriot Front has emerged as a national domestic threat with membership that have been active across all of the lower 48. They've been showing up at anti-abortion rallies, Jewish synagogues, Black Lives Matter protests, and LGBTQ pride events. Patriot Front members still to this day communicate using Vanguard America's server, which is named Blood and Soil, and that's a direct, undiluted callback to Nazi Germany. Rousseau and Patriot Front equate the white European identity to the right to inherit American soil. Rousseau is completely lacking in any original thought and has nothing to offer in his critiques of American society. In his writings about the so-called silent majority after the 2016 election, Rousseau sounds like he's openly cribbing from 1980s Pat Buchanan, just very poorly. Here's what he had to say in fall 2016. Quote, "The truth is, white voters, especially the working class, have had more than enough of being called racist, sexist, xenophobic, Islamophobic, homophobic, and the rest of the trite usual buzzwords." Now keep in mind, Rousseau is saying this in the context of Trump's candidacy being built around being openly all of those things. Rousseau continues whining and saying, quote, "The forgotten majority of the American electorate has shown that, much to the dismay of the globalist agenda, that they have not been replaced by the tens of millions of blue voting immigrants from abroad, that they can still hold up some semblance of resistance against the decay of their nation." From the globalist agenda to the replacement theory to the championing of the underclass, Rousseau is the epitome of what a dumb person thinks a smart person sounds like. Now, I know Rousseau's cadence, voice, and manner of speaking are extraordinarily annoying, but I'm only exposing you to a few minutes of this clown, so bear with me as we make a point here. Here he is at a recent DC rally.
"We are called the greatest threat. There is a threat we pose, but not to the people. We threaten only the intolerable conditions which allow our highest offices to be filled with career criminals and plutocratic scum. Here in the city that does not deserve Washington's name, we are surrounded by political prisoners, many of whom were tried and found guilty by the media long before the courts had any say. So charged with obstructing democracy. What's left of a democracy to obstruct, we ask? How can one betray a democracy which no longer exists? How can one be a traitor against a liberal fantasy to which he was never loyal? Let them call us their slurs. Insurrectionist, supremacist, the list gets longer by the day. We seek not insurrection, but resurrection. We seek not supremacy, but sovereignty.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching. I am about to make a pitch for literally my favorite startup in the world. It's called Storied Hats, and it is revolutionizing the apparel industry, starting with hats. I wear them, my kids wear them, not only because they look great, but because Storied Hats is a great company. Every piece of this is sustainably sourced, and the hats are made in ethical fair trade facilities. This is an apparel company with a conscience. A little inside baseball here. I actually know the owner, and he's one of the best people I have ever met. You wouldn't think a hat company could change the world, but this one is trying to. Most apparel is incredibly toxic. It's not made well, and it's not made ethically. Storied Hats is different. And I am told by my kids, it's also very stylish. Tons of colors, patterns, hats designed for all seasons. And the best part, no logos. If you don't want your forehead looking like a billboard, Storied Hats has you covered. Check them out at storiedhats.com and use BOATS for 15% off at checkout. That's storiedhats.com and use code BOATS at checkout. Thanks.
Patriot Front is Thomas Rousseau's personal cult. It's his cult of aggrieved, marginal owners who buy into his shtick because name dropping Thomas Paine is very impressive to people who've never read a book before. I know because 15 years ago, when I was freshly out of the service and struggling with PTSD and hadn't yet been to school, that was me. I know from being an ultra conservative Ron Paul supporter back in 2008, when I was in seriously rough shape after coming home from Iraq, how important and intelligent people can sound when they rattle off quotes from the founding fathers. My personal instability and my desire to find purpose in a new patriotism made me an easy mark back then. It made me easy to manipulate. Back then was when Elmer Stewart Rhodes was using the same exact rhetoric and his connection to the Ron Paul campaign to lure disaffected veterans into the Oath Keepers. I know what it's like to be ripe for radicalization because I was there. But what's important to realize is that aggrieved marginal loners can and do commit real harm when they adopt ideologies promoted by groups like Patriot Front and join those neo-Nazi organizations. Dylan Roof killed 9 black people in a church in Charleston, South Carolina. Here he is wearing a jacket of the flag of apartheid-era South Africa and Rhodesia, 2 aggressively racist states that have become the rallying cries for white supremacists who want to accelerate the arrival of an American race war. The average Patriot Front member has given up their families and friends as they put themselves at legal risk because of their association with Rousseau and his violent cult. And like so many cults, they're being used to provide financial comfort for their cult leader. Like I said before, many are just a single bad day away from being a mass shooter. In a country swimming with guns, we have these isolated weirdos who are being brought into what is essentially a cult that they have to pay to be members of. Thomas Rousseau has taken from Joseph Goebbels of Nazi Germany to build a sophisticated media production system with an affiliated LLC called Media to Rise. He has explicitly said that their energetic use of video and social media is so-called marketing for Patriot Front. So we have this kid who's taking lessons from Mussolini and Hitler on how to build a fascist movement, and then is marrying it with Kim Kardashian's influencer lessons to rebrand white supremacy by painting it red, white, and blue. Except Thomas Rousseau is a failed leader. Most of the young men who become members of Patriot Front don't stick around for very long. They might still be neo-Nazis and they might still be white supremacists, but dealing with Rousseau's immaturity, his paranoia, his grifting behavior as he funds his lifestyle by leeching off of their effort, it sucks for the average Patriot Front member, and they leave. How do we know this at Task Force Butler? Because we've infiltrated Patriot Front numerous times. We've been undercover as full-blown members. We've shown up to their functions, both invited and, well, not so invited. We regularly receive tips from and interview former Patriot Front members who regret being a part of the group and want to make things right. And of course, we've analyzed hundreds of gigs of data when groups like Unicorn Riot gain access to and release their confidential communications. Using our inside knowledge, Task Force Butler literally wrote the book on taking down Patriot Front using civil suits and criminal prosecutions. It's called Project Blacklisted, and you can learn more about that on our website. Within weeks of sharing the Project Blacklisted report with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, that group was able to use our analysis to help them file a lawsuit against Rousseau, some of his top lieutenants, and members in Virginia. And that's for their conspiracy to engage in a campaign of racial intimidation and to destroy murals depicting black excellence. Patriot Front is, at its core, a multi-level marketing scheme for a racist boy from Texas. But that doesn't mean that it's harmless. When someone spends time in Patriot Front, they get the rush of being part of Rousseau's spectacle when they go out in their little silly parades. But they're also trained in street fighting tactics, communications, recruitment, and how to avoid detection as they commit hate crimes. Now, just think about this for a moment. There are neo-Nazis out there who meet this guy Rousseau and find that he's too toxic to be around. After a few months, they leave. That's what happens with Thomas Rousseau and Patriot Front. His behavior may drive them out, but they're not leaving the white supremacist cause. Patriot Front is a pipeline that feeds the rest of the fascist street gangs and white supremacist groups throughout the country. Right now, we're also watching a lot of the fascist street gangs evolve from the Al-Qaeda model to the ISIS model. From big top-down organizational leadership structure to semi-independent local cells. For as long as it's existed, Patriot Front has been spinning off other smaller local and regional neo-Nazi organizations like NSC 131 who've been terrorizing New England. Through Thomas Rousseau, Patriot Front also functions as part of a broader white supremacist terror network that includes organizations such as White Lives Matter, National Justice Party, Nationalist Social Club, Active Clubs, the Rise Above Movement, the Aryan Freedom Network, and Blood Tribe, just to name a few. In multiple Task Force Butler reports on Patriot Front, we've documented where these extraordinarily violent groups are coordinating attacks on communities of color, LGBTQ folks, and anyone who might wind up in their path when they're out dressed up in their Best Buy uniforms. Now, while they may look goofy, they're kind of doing that on purpose. While they're distracting you with their Best Buy cosplay, they're also carrying deadly metal weapons and they're wearing armor because they're looking to physically assault anyone who might bump into them. So here's what we want you to take away from this today. When you see someone say, well, we can't see their faces, how many of them there are, or they look like they work at Best Buy, they're not that scary. Or you see someone who you know who's fallen into the MAGA disinformation bubble say something to the effect of, oh, they're undercover feds. There aren't real Nazi organizations in the US. This is what you need to know. Patriot Front is a violent, terrorist, racketeering gang that primarily functions to plan, train, and manufacture weapons for the explicit purpose of engaging in acts of violence and harassment against minorities, the LGBTQ+ community, and others deemed enemies by Patriot Front's leader, Thomas Ryan Rousseau. Their goal is to inspire terrorists, school shooters, and other predators who want to destroy our country using genocide. Rousseau likes to wrap himself up in self-aggrandizing, pseudo-intellectual doublespeak and compare their wearing of masks to that of the Boston Tea Party and how they dressed up as Native Americans. Rousseau claims that they're disguising themselves to engage in so-called activism, that their criminality is actually an expression of patriotism that goes back to the founding fathers. This is garbage. When a thief wears a mask to rob a bank, it's not an expression of their patriotism or their bravery standing up against a tyrannical government. They're wearing masks because they're criminals doing crimes and they don't want to get caught. Patriot Front members wear masks to deceive you and make you think that their numbers are greater than they actually are. We know from being inside the organization that they bulk up local actions by getting an assortment of white supremacists from other organizations to mask up with them and wear those clownish uniforms just for that one day. Patriot Front members wear masks because they're cowards. They know that if they're identified as part of a neo-Nazi organization, that they're going to face consequences at work, at school, with their families, and with their local communities. And finally, Patriot Front members wear masks because they've been deluded into thinking that Thomas Rousseau's pathetic little cult is going to give them a sense of purpose and brotherhood. It doesn't. Rousseau is a grifter coward who is playing on people's fears and grievances for his own personal and economic gain. That is what Patriot Front members tell us. He may love to play dress up and wreck other white supremacist lives by convincing them to break laws to impress him, but that doesn't make him less dangerous. Because when Patriot Front members are eventually identified and they're completely isolated from their friends and family, all they have left is Rousseau and his cult. That's why he wants them to get arrested, so he can control them. And so that they feel like they have no choice but to send Rousseau money to subsidize his lifestyle. Now, remember when I said that Thomas Rousseau hangs out with pedophiles and murderers? We introduced you to the murderous James Fields. Now, let me introduce you to Patriot Front member Jared Michael Boyce. He was one of those guys picked up in Idaho a few months ago, And he pleaded guilty to 9 felony counts of sexual exploitation of a minor and a misdemeanor count of dealing in material that's harmful to minors. We've recently covered the amount of pedophilia in the white supremacist and fascist street gangs. You can find the link in today's show notes. The 5 members of Patriot Front who were just convicted last week, Forrest Rankin, Devin Center, Derek Smith, James Michael Johnson, and Robert Whitted, they will for the rest of their lives be unable to scrub off the stink of Thomas Ryan Rousseau. Never be confused. Thomas Rousseau is a thug leading a gang of thugs who want to terrorize our society into submission because they truly believe in their fever dream of a white ethno-state. At Task Force Butler, we're regularly infiltrating their networks and imposing legal, real-world costs on them. There are about 24 more members of Patriot Front who will be facing trial on those same charges as part of the same conspiracy to riot, including their leader, Thomas Rousseau. And our research and reporting is helping to make sure that they get convicted. Every day at Task Force Butler, we're making it harder for them to fundraise, train, and organize. And in order to do that work, we need your support. Against All Enemies is produced by Ken Harbaugh in partnership with Task Force Butler. Our team includes our producer, Michael L. Sessor, and the Task Force Butler volunteer researchers who provide much of the intel and analysis that we'll be bringing straight to you in this new show. Come back tomorrow for another Against All Enemies. Please like and subscribe to this channel and share this video with 3 friends who you know care about democracy. And check us out at taskforcebutler.org. See you soon.